Welcome to CIS 101. I'm David Anderson, your instructor, and this is we're basically going to cover over on Chapter 2. If I can get this to work correctly. Last week we talked a little bit about a computer being a machine that performs input processing, output, and storage, and we talked about the fact that it increasingly includes a fifth component. Most of us don't have computers. We don't have phones, certainly. We don't have garage door openers if they cannot do a fifth important component, which is communicate with other devices. We talked a little bit, briefly mentioned, how a computer system is a collection of related components. We talked a little bit about the information processing cycle and how it's supported by devices we're going to talk about this week, the input devices like the keyboard or the mouse, the processing devices, the CPU, the output devices, the printer, the monitor, the speakers, and the storage devices, the hard disk, the SSD, the flash drive, whatever we have to be using. Excuse me. We talked a little bit about how you can divide computing devices into two major categories: computers for individuals and computers for organizations, just like you can broadly divide automobiles into two major categories: the cars that most of us think about, and the semis and the other large freight handling automobiles that most of us, unless we're stuck behind them on the highway, we tend not to think too much about. But in fact, or actually the larger part of the automotive industry. Most of us, when we think about cars and the automotive industry, we think about dealerships and car factories like Ford and GM. We tend not to think about the fact that while we may not see it, there are, in fact, in terms of dollar value, more going on the freight hauling side of things. We talked a little bit about how responsible computing requires an understanding of the advantages and the disadvantages of computers, okay? And how internet usage, especially excessive internet usage, can affect you and others. We talked about how using hardware and software involves some risk, going out online, getting hacked, having people misrepresent you. We talked about how computing devices and technology can be misused to harm individuals and organizations, or used to benefit individuals in society. And we talked about how computers can create new job opportunities and shift the labor demand towards skilled workers with higher pay. And this is really nice, unless you happen to be in a job category that's been affected by it. Just like when the automobile industry swept in, not everybody was thrilled with it. Anybody who's involved in any way, shape, or form with horse and buggies, okay, was in their minds negatively affected, even though the people who replaced them in the automotive industry were paid more and were highly skilled. Not everybody necessarily agreed. Chapter 2 talks a little bit about understanding the specific parts of the computer, and that's what we're going to briefly talk about this week. And we're specifically going to talk about understanding your computer, what are input devices, what are output devices, okay? And when we talk about that, we are going to talk about things like the four main functions of a computer system. We're going to revisit that, and in fact, you're going to find we're going to revisit that a lot. And that's and that would be it's a good piece of information to leave the semester with, because no matter what you do, pretty much whatever you go do, okay, with whomever you are working, you're going to find yourself bumping up against this stuff, and it's good to know how it works. We're going to talk about what a bit is, what a byte is. We'll describe how they're measured, used, and processed. We're going to talk a little bit about the common types of computers. We're going to discuss their main features. We're going to identify the main types of keyboards and touchscreens. We're going to describe the main types of mice and pointing devices. We're going to talk a little bit about images and sounds are input into computing devices. We're going to talk a little bit about the common types of monitors, and we're going to identify some of the important aspects of their quality. Okay, they're not just all the same. We're going to describe the various types of printers and explain when you would use them. And we're going to discuss some of the options you have for outputting sound from your computing devices. Okay. And, basically, again, as we briefly mentioned last week, and we will revisit again throughout the semester, any computing device we expect to be able, as a data processing device, to perform four major functions, okay? It's going to input, it's going to process, it's going to have output of some type, and then it's going to store that information, and then as long as electricity is applied, it doesn't matter if you think it's just sitting there doing nothing or not. It's going to again have input, process, output, and storage. Even if it's just in a wait status, it's going to do those four things over and over and over again. When we talk about the CPU and the data and the instructions and the data that the instructions consist of, at the computer level, we're talking about the basic binary digit being a 0 or a 1. It's really remarkable, I think, and we tend not to think about this very much. We just take for granted our phone conversations, our movies or watch, this presentation that you're watching, our garage doors, our TVs, okay? Everything at the CPU level is going to be a 0 or a 1. And this is comparable to basically electricity, with 1 being a value of light on and 0 being a value of light off. And to think about zeros and ones arranged, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands and millions of them arranged in various groups to get a computer to do things it does, it's really an impressive thing. Okay? And since realistically a particular bit can't do really much of anything by itself, we further organize our bits into bytes, which are a unique combination of 8 bits of zeros and ones, and by having enough bytes and enough different combinations, we can do an amazing amount of things. And we tend to, again, just take it for granted. We just take it for granted that the traffic lights are going to work, that our phone conversations are going to work, that airplanes are going to fly, that our televisions are going to work. It's really, our emails are going to work. It's really kind of impressive. And further, because again, you can't do much with just 8 bits of zeros and ones, we go ahead and we organize our bits into kilobytes, megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, and petabytes. When we talk about the types of computers, we broadly break them down into mainframes, where you have many users simultaneously using them. And an example of this we tend not to think about is, if you've ever been to an ATM to either withdraw money or to check and see how much money you don't have, those are all terminals connected to a mainframe, can be anywhere in the country, really anywhere in the world, that basically takes your inquiries along with, hundreds and thousands of other people pretty much simultaneously, and basically puts out the information that each individual is asking for. A much smaller group, but a very powerful group, are supercomputers that are used for complex calculations. And we also have embedded computers. Another type of computer is an embedded computer, which are self-contained little microcomputers, like you'd find in a house electric thermostat, or possibly in a drone, or a tiny, the toy cars that we used to drive around as kids with a remote-controlled car, or possibly a garage door opener, or whatever. All examples of embedded computers. When we talk about input devices, we're talking about the devices we use to enter data instructions into our computers. And the examples of this include a keyboard, a mouse, a microphone, a scanner, a digital camera, a stylus, and they mentioned microphone there, but we tend not to think about it too much. But like this presentation is being put together with a microphone. Output devices, the devices that we use to send data out of the computer, can take the form of text, pictures, sound, or video. And the examples of this include your monitor, your printer, your speakers, and your earphones. And something that we tend not to think too much about. Most of us have a cell phone. Most of us, whether we use it or not, have a mode in our cell phone that allows it, when it's ringing, to not ring, but like we're in a meeting or whatever, it will simply vibrate. Let us know that someone's trying to reach us, but without creating the noise. And that is yet another type of output that is out there. Other types, and when we talk about our monitors, we're talking about the major types being a liquid crystal display, and these are all flat panels, or a light emitting diode, or LED, or an organic light emitting diode, known as OLED. Again, most of us tend not to pay too much attention to that. A little bit of a funny story there. In the church that we go to, when my kids were younger, really pre-kindergarten, the church wives, and I think they still do this today, basically used to have a deal where all the wives with small kids, basically had a group if you chose to participate in it. And basically the deal was after church, they would, all the kids would go over to some, one of the mother's houses for a mass play date. And of course the attractions were that the kids are on a play date and having healthy interaction in a healthy environment and a chance to work off energy. And the mothers got to socialize with each other while the kids kept themselves entertained, which was a break for everybody. And, and also it meant that unless you happened to be the house that the play date was at, okay, so your house wasn't being destroyed by a horde of young kids running around, bursting with energy, trying to burn it all off. The downside to it was on that, one weekend every couple of months or 3 months or so, that it was going to be your turn to host everybody. It could be kind of hard on everybody because, the mothers in particular would go into cleaning mode because they didn't want, they knew that their house was going to be scrutinized by the other parents. So they were cleaning it from top to bottom so it would look really, really, really nice. I would just get out of town when that happened because just being alive and breathing, I was in the way somehow. Okay. But while this was going on, I remember one time in particular coming back from one of those events. I cleared out of Dodge while my wife had the other mothers over at the house. And when I came back, the minute I opened the door, I knew that I was in trouble. I just knew it. I didn't know it. I couldn't think of anything I'd done wrong, but I knew it was trouble in River City for Mr. Anderson. And I just went in there and it's like, hello, dear, what's going on? How can I help? I hope you had a good time. See, the house is still standing. I don't see anything burned down. And she basically just said to me, I need you to go to our other house because we'd purchased the house. This was in 2008 during the real estate bubble collapse. We picked up a house out of foreclosure, bank foreclosure, along the beach in Whiting, Indiana. Really, really nice thing, right off, it's good. We used to go there and actually spend a lot of our summers there because the kids could just troop down to the beach and just troop over to the restaurants. And, it was really a nice thing. And she basically just told me, I want you to go to the beach house and I want you to get the flat panel TV there and bring it here and put it here and take this TV and put it there. Because the TV we had been using was a 19-inch TV that I'd purchased. It was a Sony, I believe. Very good quality. I was a high-end TV back in Fort Knox 20 years ago, and it was still working. Still had, the cable inputs and everything still worked fine. But it was a conventional, known as a CRT, the old fat type of TV, not a flat panel. And the kids were all running up and down all throughout the house, and apparently they were asking my kids, don't you have a normal TV? Don't you have a TV? Because in their minds, if it wasn't a flat panel TV, it wasn't a TV. And I just thought it was kind of cute that even though we had this, TV, a conventional CRT TV in the house, they didn't see it as that because everybody knew that TVs were flat panel things. They weren't big boxy things. So I just nodded my head, glad that was all it was going to take to get out of the doghouse. And the next morning I took our TV down to the house and brought that one back, and I was, everything was fine again. Other types of output devices include inkjets and lasers, and I really want to stress to you that generally speaking, individuals buy the inkjets because they are cheaper up front. They are much more affordable, whereas most organizations will invest in lasers. And the reason for that is that if you've ever had to purchase, and usually this is something I can call on people and get all sorts of input for, if you ever had to purchase an inkjet ink cartridge, they are hugely expensive. Whereas for laser printers, even though they cost more up front, okay, where you may get 100 or 150 pages of output on an inkjet printing cartridge, okay, you'll get between 4 and 20,000 copies out of a laser printer, so print cartridge. So even though the printer itself, the print device, is going to be more expensive, the print cartridges, the actual cost per page on a laser printer is going to be usually far less than it's going to be on an inkjet printer. So that in terms of overall usage for an organization, inkjet or laser is simply the way to go. Whereas most individuals, especially if they're giving it as a gift or they're on a budget, and they don't expect to print a whole lot of things, inkjet tends to be more attractive. Other types of output devices include all-in-one printers, which are really kind of handy and very, very space conscious, but have the disadvantage that if one thing breaks down, very often the entire, all those capabilities are broken down. Plotters that are used by engineering firms for the printing of oversized images, or thermal printers. And most of you run into thermal printers all the time, and you don't think twice about it. If you've ever been to the store and bought something and you get the little receipt and it's kind of like a gray or bluish, not too clear printing, and you maybe sign your name if it's more than a certain amount of money, but if it's like less than $50, you don't. That is actually a thermal printer. Basically the paper is not just paper. It's a thin layer of aluminum with a thin layer of very cheap paper on top of it. And when the little electrical diodes burn off the papers, letting the aluminum backing show through it, it's very cheap, okay, very durable, and not very good for long lasting, but they're not expected to be. It's just for a temporary receipt, proof of purchase, whatever. Other types of speaker devices, other types of output devices include speakers. They're output devices for sound. And there's a friend of mine who's big on sounds. Says that he has a sound system in his computer system in his house that makes his stereo fear for his life. But it's really a matter of identifying the components you want and being willing to spend money on them. He has a dedicated room in his house just for sound, and it's really, really impressive. My problem is that since I don't know enough about sound to really appreciate it, it's really nice, but I can't appreciate just how good it is. I just don't have the training or the expertise to do that. Okay, other type of output devices include headphones, earbuds. They can be very handy. Allow you to keep from distracting others, or sometimes when I'm listening to something, I may not, if it's an adult topic, I may not want my kids to necessarily, some of the people I listen to on YouTube, they're a little bit casual in their use of a profanity. They're good videos on good topics, but they use, the F word or other words really more than I like. And I will listen to them on an earphone, okay, because I don't want my kids or, to necessarily hear it. They'll be learning those words fast enough, and I don't want them to hear them from something that I'm doing. Okay. When we talk about the capabilities of a computer to process, storage, and connect, we're talking about the processing and the memory that are on the motherboard, the storing the data and the information and where they go, the connecting the peripherals of the computer, and the power controls and the ergonomics of a computer. And when we talk about this, we are specifically going to be talking about what is a motherboard, what is random access memory, or read-only, or read and write memory, or known as RAM. We'll talk a little bit about the main functions of the CPU. We're going to talk a little bit about the various types of hard drives. We're going to define cloud storage and explain how to use it. We're going to describe the various portable and optical storage solutions. We're going to list the common types of ports used today. Talk a little bit about the options for adding ports to your device, easier on a desktop, but you can add things to your phone. You can add things to your laptop. It really depends on you and your needs and what you're willing, what is important to you. We're going to describe how to manage the power consumption on your computing devices, and we're going to define ergonomics, and we're going to discuss why it's really important to you and the ideal physical setup for using computing devices. And I'm going to especially stress to you that the traditional straight across keyboard that most of us have and use, be it a laptop or be it a desktop, okay, is not necessarily good for us. It's easier to manufacture and it gets the job done, but it's not designed with our health or welfare in mind. When we talk about the processing and memory in the motherboard, we're talking about the motherboard, and it's called a motherboard. And if we were in additional classes where I'd pop up a video of a mama cat with her kittens or a mother dog with her puppies, it's called a motherboard, because all the other peripherals plug into it and put their information, exchange information through it and get their electricity from it. This includes your CPU, includes your ROM and your RAM and your cache. We're going to talk about all these in a little bit. We're going to talk about the slots for the expansion cards, the sound and video cards, and the network interface card, also known as the network adapter card. The NIC or the NAC are the same thing, just different terms. Okay? When we talk about the RAM, we're talking about something stands for random access memory or read and write memory. Essentially it's the same thing. And this is what, as long as electricity is applied, it stores instructions and data. It's a series of one to several memory modules, depending on the type of the computing device we're talking about. And I want to stress this, it's temporary. It's there only as long as electricity is applied. When the electricity is taken away, it stops working. This is distinct from the ROM, which is a much smaller memory element in your computer. ROM stands for read-only memory. And this is basically something that's it stores the startup instructions for the computer when it's turned on, goes to get, okay, what do we have to do to start things up? And it's permanent. The instructions remain there as long as the computer is in use and not broken. Excuse me. When we talk about what the brains of the computer, and it's not to say that every other part isn't just as important, we're talking about the CPU, the central processing unit. Okay, this is the element that controls all the functions of computer. It's the element that processes the instructions that the other computer elements are going to carry out. Okay, and depending on the type of processing you have, it's capable of billions of tasks per second, which puts it way, way, way behind, I want to stress this, the human brain, which is a really remarkable instrument. The CPU basically is measured in terms of its speed and the number of cores that it has, okay? And neither of these, once you purchase a device, either as an individual or on behalf of a corporation, you have a whole lot of control over, and it's something to be aware of. Not only because they're important to you, but also you have to understand why they're important to you. Case in point, for a lot of your computing tasks, single core is fine. You may have trouble finding a single core computer, desktop, laptop, or whatever anymore, because increasingly the manufacturing is focused on dual core or quad core or whatever, because it sounds cool, and it may in fact be necessary. But for a lot of tasks, individual and business, a single core is fine. Does everything you need. When we talk about storing data information, we're talking about the traditional hard drive, which is a series of platters like we see here with a read and write it like an old phonograph player on top of them. Okay, it can be internal for permanent storage or it can be external. And we're increasingly seeing hard drives replaced by solid-state drives, which are faster. They're a little more expensive. They used to be a lot more expensive. They're still a little bit more expensive, but they are certainly gaining ascendancy. One of the fastest, especially if you have a computer, one of the fastest, used to be the fastest way to improve the performance of any computer was to, and it's still true, is to add more RAM. It's a saying in the IT field, and it's still a true saying. But we are also seeing increasingly, and I'm doing this myself, I have way too many computers at home, and I'll often buy an older computer. I'm very fond of Lenovo's, and I will, if you pardon the expression, soup it up. And the two things I would like to do are just see how much memory I can put into it. A lot of older systems that were designed to handle 3 or 4 gigabytes can actually be tweaked to handle 16 gigabytes of memory. Okay. And the other thing I like to do is take an existing hard drive and we swap it out with a solid-state drive. And those two changes can really, really enhance the capability of an older computer, dual core, and do a lot of nice things with it. And I like to do it for a couple of reasons, one of which is a lot of the older laptops had more of a business focus, and their keyboards and screens were designed for the business user. They were more square and tall versus widescreen. Widescreens are great for watching YouTube videos, but when you're working on a document, when you're writing code, having a certain amount of depth to your screen is a really, really handy thing. Externally, you can store data information through an external hard drive, and you can even take an older hard drive and put an external case on it and continue to use it, or some type, and there's so many types of these, of flash storage. And hopefully everybody has one or two flash drives that they're using for storing their information. I would recommend two, one of which is simply an exact duplicate of the first one, because if something happens to the first one, you want to have a backup on it. And the reason I recommend a flash drive is if something happens to your laptop or your desktop or whatever you're using, having it on a flash drive is a nice way to have all your important files safe. I back up, and I have like 6 backup locations at the house for all my work files, all my important files, and I back them up every week so that if anything ever happens to my computers, my data on my flash drives, my data on my files is safe at some other location. I will never lose my work, or at least not most of it. And we also have optical storage options as well. CDs, which are very, very popular for when you don't need too much storage, or for such as music, and DVDs, which store way, way more data than a CD, but are also slightly more expensive. And you may have Blu-ray discs. Now, the problem with these from a organizational standpoint is simply that digital technology, those zeros and ones the CPU uses, can be replicated exactly, which is kind of neat from the individual, using standpoint, but not too cool if you're in an industry and you don't want your stuff copied exactly like a movie, like music, whatever. So there are issues that have to be dealt with in terms of copyright protection. When we talk about getting all these devices to work, especially external devices, we're talking about understanding the different ways to connect peripherals to the computer ports. The universal serial bus is exactly what it stands. It's a USB. We now have USB 1, 2, and 3 capabilities, and with increasing speed capabilities. We have FireWire 800, and Thunderbolt, which are very, very popular for large amounts of data transfer, like a music or a video professional, for example, might have in their setup in their system. But for the average user, you and I, USB 2 or 3 is really generally more than we need for most things. Okay. When you're connecting things to any type of a computing device, you want to pay attention to the types of connectivity ports you have. For example, most laptops will have maybe 3 USB ports, sometimes 4, but 3 is really enough for most people. And in the past, they would have less than that. You may have an audio port for connecting a headphone to microphones and speakers, and you may have dedicated video ports, or you may have USB. It really depends on the type of software, hardware you have, and what your needs are. I really want to stress to you something that we tend not to take for granted, especially when you're younger, that one of the most important computing components you can have is a good chair. Okay, the human body evolved over millions of years and hundreds of thousands of years to walk around looking in a hunter-gatherer mode, or to lie down resting. When we tend not to think about it, but when we're sitting, okay, we are putting 400% more stress on our spine than we are when we're walking around, when we're lying down. Sitting is not something we really evolved to do very well. And a good chair and a good monitor are really, really important to you. In fact, the federal government actually has rules under OSHA, the Occupational and Safety Health Administration, that after working on computing devices of any type for 50 minutes, you need to take, by law, a 10-minute break. And by 10-minute break, I don't mean go look at something else on your website or go get away from your computer and start texting on your phone. Get up, walk around, take a break, get a snack, get away from your computer, get away from your screens, look at something else, look outside, look at nature, get some distance viewing going on, okay? Because if you don't do that, and you can get away with it for the longest time, you're going to wind up with some issues. And, case in point, the fastest growing, except for COVID, and aside from COVID, and I'm not sure how COVID would fit into it, prior to COVID, the fastest growing health issue for young people in the U.S., really in the world, were children needing glasses way before they need glasses, or needing glasses when they should never have needed them at all. And the reason for that is kids are spending way too much time looking at screens, and I'm guilty of it too. And I see it all the time when I take my daughter to ballet class or whatever, or I take my son to his karate class. The rest of the kids, that they have to be towed along in order to keep them quiet. They're playing a video game of some kind, either on a phone or maybe on a dedicated video device. But in any case, they're staring at a screen, and they're not staring at it for just 50 minutes or whatever. They're spending way too much time on it, and that actually is bad for your eyes. And your eyes are a type of muscle. You're doing just one thing. You're doing too much of it, and I am occasionally guilty of that as well. Okay, we talked a little bit about understanding your computer. Talked a little bit about the 4 major functions of a computer system. We talked a little bit, and we'll revisit this throughout the semester, what are bits, what are bytes, and how they are measured and used and processed. We talked a little bit about the common types of computers, a little bit about their main features, then talked a little bit about the main types of keyboards and touchscreens, a little bit about the main types of mice and pointing devices, a little bit about the images and sounds are input into computing devices, a little bit about the common types of monitors, okay, a little bit about the various types of printers with an emphasis on inkjet and laser, and a little bit about the options for outputting sound from your computing devices, okay. We talked a little bit about what is a motherboard, what is RAM. We talked a little bit about the major functions of the central processing unit, the CPU. We talked a little bit about the various types of hard drives, a little bit about cloud storage, okay, and how we use it. We talked a little bit about the various portable and optical storage options. We've talked a little bit about the common types of ports used today. We talked a little bit about the options you have for adding ports to your device. We talked a little bit about power and ergonomics and the importance of ergonomics, far more than most of us realize. You want to put, and we'll revisit this, you want to put some serious thought and money into a decent chair. You want, and if possible, you want to put some serious thought and money into your computer screen. One of the things that we're going to talk about in a future video, is about the refresh rate on your computer monitor. Okay, the default refresh rate is 60 hertz. It's been like that for decades. That's good for the manufacturer. It's like that straight keyboard. It is not good for your eyes. It wasn't designed to be good for your eyes. It seems okay. It says, but you're really beating your eyes up. It's like doing a push-up every 5 minutes. So if possible, you want to have a computing device that you can set the refresh rate for higher than 60. 72 or higher is best. Okay. In addition to this video, and we're going to talk more about Chapter 2 in a later video, you want to this week read through Chapters 1 and 2. You want to review the textbook chapter review questions, assuming that you've got your book yet. It may still be coming in, I realize that. You want to view the Word video, which I have made available to you, sent you an email announcement, and I will put out for you. This week, I want you to do Word Chapter 1, steps 1.1 through 1.10. All I need is that final file submitted to me in Assignment 2, okay, in Blackboard. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about Chapter 2, okay, and we're going to jump into Word Chapter 2. And bear in mind, and we got plenty of time, okay, but this gets back to the chapter review questions in the textbook, not the lab book. The midterm is 6 weeks away, month and a half, plenty of time, but you do not want to wait until the night before the midterm to suddenly say, oh my gosh, the midterm is tomorrow, and I need to start reading. Okay, if you read a little bit every week, okay, you're going to be much better. You're going to do much better on the midterm exam than if you try to cram it all in the night before. Okay, subject to your questions. That is the end of this video, and I want you to jump into the Word video and then work on your lab. Thank you.